Let's take a look at side bending on this pad, which I'm telling you, it's going to sound biased, but objectively speaking, I can't find any place truly better. You might find something equally as effective, but better than this for side bending is pretty rare. I'd like to have some place to start people where it didn't have their neck sticking out this way. That would make it better. But when it comes down to support and the right shape of support for the side and side bending, this is phenomenal. Doing it on a ball is not optimal in my opinion, because A, it starts way too high with too big an angle. They've got to keep from rolling the thing because it is domed in each direction. And they've got to keep the thing from rolling on the ground. So they've got to keep from rolling off the apex of the ball, and they've got to keep it from rolling on the ground. That is so much to juggle that the actual strengthening available from that, the output, the tension production, or the improvement in that, becomes secondary to the brain. It's not even as important as staying on the ball. Get something like this, you can focus on what you're really trying to accomplish here. Now, to tell you the truth, because of the spine and side bending, and you've got rib cage, and you've got shoulders, and you've got hips and tissue, very rarely, this is going to sound counter to the progression I've mentioned on the crunch, but very rarely do you have to go lower than a 5 or 6. In fact, very often if you go lower than 5 or 6, by the time that this squishes in, you're almost in frontal plane neutral. You're almost right there. So the big key here again, just like the crunch, is where you're positioning them over this thing and the considerations of how long they are and where they tend to bend. So let's take a look, and I tell you what I might have you do, Meredith. I might have you put your back to them, and I know they'll be mad at me for doing that, but the reason is because I want them to see your spine, because that's really the place you need to look from. You really do. So I'm going to have her start down here, and you'll notice her shoulders are up on this thing pretty high. And not allowing her to bend as much as she could. Here's a basic rule for setting up the arms and the legs. I'm not opposed to somebody actually taking the bottom arm and putting it under their head, taking the top arm and holding the bottom arm. So she kind of looks like this. And sometimes when you're trying to teach and all that stuff, it keeps them from getting stressed out up here. This still may be the part that eliminates this as an exercise option, right? So pay attention to that constantly. No matter what you're doing to focus here, you can't ignore that. Now the legs, I've found over the past decade or two that there's some things you can do to really improve their ability, and again, not worrying about rolling around. Have a tendency to bend the bottom leg, as you can see here, because that keeps them from rolling front to back. And a tendency to straighten the top leg. Because one of the things they're liable to do wrong as they start to crunch to the side is they'll want to flex forward sometimes, or they'll want to turn and face upward as they do it. Sometimes having this leg straight helps them to see straight line, versus if both legs are bent and they're already flexed at the hips, they have sometimes a tendency to flex at the trunk also. So to me, this might work for her. But what I have a tendency to do is look at the apex of the pad and the apex of where they bend sideways. And I would have a tendency to take her a little more towards her shoulders. But let's go ahead and look at one first so you can see what it looks like when she's here. Because you can see right now she's starting in right side bending, but she's also got this pelvis lower than this cervical area. So let's see what that happens. And here's my recommendation in case you haven't taught side bending before. She should not be thinking about lifting her head and shoulders. She should be thinking about moving this towards this. If the head and shoulder come up, that's great. But the problem is if that's their primary goal, they start throwing it, okay? So I'm going to have her tighten right here. Going to be everything on the top part of the spine all the way around. She's going to tighten and start trying to smash my hand with that contraction. She's pulling those ribs towards the pelvis. That's actually not bad, okay? Go back down. Her shoulders keep her from trying to go any lower. So she's not exceeding her side bending capabilities. If there's anything ever uncomfortable about doing this, you back off. You stop and you back off a range, you back off of load, you find a way to make this easier. So one more time so you can see. I'm going to look in the monitor there. That's a little bit different, and as difficult as that is, she's actually doing quite a bit of work here. It's easier than this one I'm going to make her. I'm glad you signed a disclaimer because I'm going to move you up really fast. Scoot on up there. Now, up. So can we see apex of the spine? Let's see what happens. This is going to be a little tougher. There's a little more load out that way. I'm going to give her an anchor here. I probably should have done that on the former one. It would have helped her to be able to create more output and move the load, because this part's not trying to compete for movement. Does that feel okay? And she's struggling, she's working. If she were to throw it, she'd be avoiding the challenge that's going to be beneficial to her. Throwing it's a bad idea. Now, she didn't actually come up much more than straight, as best I can tell from here. That, to me, was a little too tough for her. So I have a tendency to back her down where we were before so that she starts to roll off of the apex a little bit. Try one more time. Tighten. Don't lift, just squeeze. Let the lift happen. That looks better to me. Feel better? Mm-hmm. So that little bit of adjustment, it was maybe an inch this way, changed everything for her. And it was a combination of where she's lying on this thing, the way her spine bends, and her current strength, all those things. So let's take a look at someone else who may need entirely different requirements on the CorePAD for side bending.